Well, hello everybody. Welcome to another fantastic episode of
Oh yeah.
Calling from the Wilderness. I said
Speak that into
fantastic.
existence.
Yeah, I'm naming and
Yeah.
claiming it. This episode is going to be our best. And if it
Best.
isn't, there is no God. That is how I'm. If I have faith enough, then it has to come through.
Yeah. Yeah. Because of course you want something really life and death to put God on the line for.
Yeah.
And that's
Thou
this.
shalt
Yeah.
not put the Lord your God to the test, but I am. It's all been predetermined, so maybe this is our best, maybe it's not. Doesn't matter. Everything's
Mm,
predetermined. God knows
mm.
everything. He set everything into motion.
Yeah, yeah.
So what does prayer do? Nothing. And
Just a
that
puppet
is
on a
our
string.
introduction to Calvinism, who is a staple of the Presbyterian Church that I am a part of. I've got a book. I think it's that one right there called
Yeah.
Mere Calvinism.
Oh
It goes
really?
over the tulip
Oh,
of
interesting.
Calvinism, which is total depravity,
Hmm.
unlimited grace,
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
limited atonement.
Yeah.
I can't remember what I is.
I
And
don't know.
then P is perseverance of the saints, I think.
You're
Anyway,
ahead of me.
anyway,
Yeah. Let me see.
ignore everything we just talked about at the beginning. That was all rubbish, as Tim on the other side of the pond would say. And I
Rubbish.
would say, as a Greek scholar, scubala. Even though I'm not a Greek scholar, that is from the Bible, and it means the sh word, dung, but like the bad word.
Four years in Bible college, and that's probably the one thing you
I didn't even
definitely
get that at
memorized.
Bible school. It was a preacher at our
Oh,
we did back in Thunder Bay. We did Indigenous Reconciliation weekend
mm.
where we had like Richard Twiss and Jonathan Miracle and all these guys. And there was one guy that was there, and his name was it wasn't zucchini, but it sounded a lot like that. And I can't think of it without. But he was super funny, and he told us all about scubala.
Yeah.
He was like, "This is what Paul meant, dung," but the other word. And then he joked about he wanted to go witness to a nudist colony, but he thought the only good missionaries there would be blind missionaries, so they wouldn't be tempted. But the problem with them is they're always like, "Oh, let me see," and that could cause issues as well. So he would take a giant Bible, duct tape it to his waist, and go there. It was quite funny. Like it was quite hilarious. Um,
Amazing.
yeah, but,
Amazing.
yeah, don't
Yeah.
know where that came from. Rubbish,
No.
scuba.
Inspira inspirations for missions work.
Yes,
Non-colonialized missions work. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Let's be very specific about that. Um, we're gonna show you how to be Christians our way.
Amazing.
Uh, well, that's all I had for the introduction. What an introduction that
Uh,
was, eh? You're frozen on the screen. So I guess I will take us
it's
away. Um,
your Derek.
so this week I told Tim that I'm okay with doing the whole book of Isaiah, and his response to
Top
that
to
was
bottom.
bringing a verse, chapter 2 out of Galatians. So a little bit of miscommunication there. Um, but we're going to go with his
Yeah.
thing. You are still
No.
frozen on my screen. Are you frozen
Am
on
I
yours?
still frozen?
Yeah. Oh,
No, but
no. Now you're good.
there you go.
There you go.
Yeah, the internet. I'm I'm doing the same things I normally do on Thursday, but we'll see. We'll see what happens with this one then. This might, you know what happened? You claimed it so early, and now it's just going to the scuba.
Yeah. You know, you want to make God laugh, just tell him your plans. And her plan was to make this the best episode
That
ever.
that'd be
And
like the worst stand-up comedy, wouldn't it? You know, just telling somebody what your plans are.
yeah.
Like I just like I understand the concept of it, but I'm just like, poor God, if that's the kind of humor that we're bringing to him. I feel like we
He
should be
gets
looking
blamed for a
at
lot of stuff that um, isn't really his fault.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, shall we see what Paul says about that in the book of Galatians?
Hey, Mr. Mall Cop, zooming around on your sweet segues, getting into getting into Galatians. I
Yeah.
like it. Let's do it.
When in doubt, just pull it out.
For all our viewers, I am very, very tired right now, so I might be a little silly, as you can tell, because my brain is only working at part capacity. I,
There you go.
yeah. So,
There you go. Well, we'll see where we go then with this.
and even on a good day,
Yeah.
it's not that good, and so this is scuba.
Well,
Okay,
yeah.
our new minister, he has this little glass of rocks, um, on one of his tables that he bought at like the dollar store or something, because
Okay.
one has like says like grace and love and hope, and so there's a bunch of rocks that didn't have anything written on it.
Mm,
So his nickname is Chico, so I wrote Chico on one.
yeah.
He talked about a taco night they used to do, so I wrote taco, and then on one I wrote scubala, because I know that no one else will know what that means except for him. and so and so I put it in there. And he was like, "Scubala." I'm like, "Yeah, that means dung, right?" But like I said the
Yeah.
sh word. Um, well, shit. How to say it? Uh, that means that, right? And he's like, "Yeah. How did you know that?" And I'm like, "I know all the dirty words in all languages,
All languages. Yeah. Yeah.
all the languages."
Yeah. I'm
Um,
not a linguist, but yeah.
I'm not a linguist, but I play one on
Amazing.
TV. Uh, so let's get into
Uh,
this
all
uh,
right, here we go.
as our
So
ramblings
this,
continue.
yeah, yeah, there we go. So this is the first 14 verses of Galatians chapter 2. Then after 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, taking Titus along with me. I went up in response to a revelation. Then I laid before them, though only in a private meeting with the acknowledged leaders, the gospel that I proclaim among the Gentiles, in order to make sure that I was not running or had not run in vain. But even Titus, who was with me, was not compelled to be circumcised, though he was a Greek, but because of false believers secretly brought in who slipped in to spy on the freedom we have in Christ Jesus, so that they might enslave us. We did not submit to them for a moment, so that the truth of the gospel might always remain with you. And from those who were supposed to be acknowledged leaders, what they actually were makes no difference to me. God shows no partiality. Those leaders contributed nothing to me. On the contrary, when they saw that I had been entrusted with the gospel for the uncircumcised, just as Peter had been entrusted with the gospel for the circumcised, for he who worked through Peter, making him an apostle to the circumcised, also worked through me in sending me to the Gentiles. And when James and Cephas and John, who were acknowledged pillars, recognized the grace that had been given to me, they gave to Barnabas and me the right hand of fellowship, agreeing that we should go to the Gentiles and they to the circumcised. They asked only one thing, that we remember the poor, which was actually what I was eager to do. But when Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him to his face, because he stood self condemned. For until certain people came from James, he used to eat with the Gentiles. But after they came, he drew back and kept himself separate for fear of the circumcision faction. And the other Jews joined him in this hypocrisy, so that even Barnabas was led astray by this hypocrisy. But when I saw that they were not acting consistently with the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas before them all, if you, though a Jew, live like a Gentile and not a Jew, how can you compel the Gentiles to live like Jews? Not much to say, eh?
I think he nailed it. Um, that Cephas.
Yeah. Mm. I think I love what I love in this passage is that final verse when he's calls him out on his own hypocrisy, um, and the circumcision faction. It sounds like, it sounds like a group of people who have T-shirts and business cards. Um, but I think like the one verse that really jumped out to me as we were reading it here was 4, because they brought in false believers secretly who slipped in to spy on the freedom we have in Christ Jesus, so that they might enslave us. That whole thing about freedom in Christ and slavery to a system or something else, I thought was really, yeah, interesting. Was there anything that stuck out to you, Derek, and your half action brain?
Well, I kind of like that he calls Peter Cephas when he's acting out of line, right? Like he at the beginning he calls Peter Peter, but then when Peter's
Yeah.
sitting with living like the
Mm,
Gentiles, he calls him Cephas, which I never put two
mm,
and two together like that before. And
mm,
and yeah, like the first part of this, the first 10 verses, I really like because they both the groups, um, Paul on one side and Peter and James and that on the other side, they they realize their strengths and
mm,
what they're called to do, and they kind of release each other to go do
mm,
different things, knowing that they're the same group, and witnessing to both groups is different, right?
mm,
One, you're convincing that this Messiah that you've been waiting for, like to the
mm,
Jews, you're convincing them that this Messiah that they've been waiting for, that have been spoken in the prophets and um, throughout the Old Testament stuff, that's this Jesus guy. And the other ones,
mm,
they're probably not too familiar with the Old Testament, so you're hitting them differently,
mm,
probably more uh, philosophically,
mm, mm,
um, and so they understand that and they go their separate ways. And
mm,
I know different times, me being at the church, I other people have been called to different groups, and I'm like, yeah, but you are either I don't. I've come up against my own self where I'm like, well, they're witnessing to someone else, but it's way different than how I'm witnessing to people around me. They're doing
mm,
it wrong, kind of thing, right?
yeah, yeah.
And I've had to put myself in check, or
Mm,
I've gone and been like, well, they're trying to witness to those people the same way that I'm witnessing here, and they're
mm,
two different groups, and you're not gonna
mm,
uh, do this. Like we talked about colonization uh,
yeah, yeah.
before with that little joke. Like that's you know going to the Gentiles, trying to witness to them, like going to the
Mm,
uncircumcised, trying to witness to them like the circumcised, right? And it's this. This is
yeah,
what the Christian idea or perfect practice looks like,
yeah.
and even Peter falls for that in the second part because he's
Mm,
well, this is what a follower of Jesus um, looks like and eats like, and that. So
mm,
I'm going to stick with this group because this is what this is what I know to be the way, and he's giving into that pressure of it instead of understanding that something's different now and eating with the Gentiles. So what? So my question in this is, if I'm honest with myself, what does being a follower of Christ look like? What are the kind of not even I don't want to say fences, but kind of flags that they put up, like, this is what I am, this is what I am, this is how you act and support, and not. I'm looking at different youth devotionals for my youth group, and most of them are just garbage, right? They're scuba. They're just terrible, pushing agendas or not really giving like a fake sense of discussion where they're hitting something from one side and they want you to discuss that one side but not the other. Kind of thing, right? And I came along this one, that guy's going through the Ten Commandments, and he talked about the using the Lord's name in vain, which growing up I thought meant, cursing, or saying the Lord's name when you stub your toe or something. And then later, I lean more towards saying God is saying something when he's not, like using him to justify something that I'm doing. Right? I really feel like the Lord is calling us to give me $1 million or something like that, right? Or going to attack a different country or whatever, right? That kind of stuff. And he was coming at it from the way of using the Lord's name in vain. If we are Christians, we have the name of Christ on us. We had better live like Christ did. And if we don't, we are using that name we've been given in vain. And it's hurtful, and it does nothing to support his cause or properly represent who he is, right? Like our name, children of God or Christians or whatever you want to do it, the name we've been given, we better not use that in vain. We better be using that correctly. And so that I bring that up with this is when I think of a Christian, Christ, what's the separation I have between this is what Christ is like and this is what Christians are like, and what are the different things I'm doing that one has to be a follower of Christ? That may not be what Christ is. And is Peter coming up against that with this and the eating, certain rules, certain practices in the Judeo-Christian or Judeo faith that Christians have taken over that aren't of Christ. But man,
and you definitely do catch some of the kind of the bits of like nuance and conversation in this, in the way that Paul's even describing, the sense that actually, he has a gospel, he has a good news to proclaim among the Gentiles, as you were saying, and then Peter or Cephas has this gospel to proclaim amongst the Gentiles, or against to the Jews, and then I think it's that really kind of in verse 10, that they don't talk about kind of what the gospel is, but they talk about this like super practical thing. They asked only one thing, that we remember the poor, which was actually what I was eager to do. And it's like, and I think, like we've spent so many years fighting over what is the gospel, and what does that mean? And as you said, how are you handling it correctly and delivering it to people correctly and appropriately? And we've missed this key part about, actually, the gospel is about the good news of where God
Mhm.
says, you call me Abba, Father, and I will, and ask me for your daily bread. you know and
Yeah.
and like, as you say, I think, like, it's, you notice it when you're, it's just like when you're working with like young people and looking to materials, and you just realize just how people are, by and large, people are less interested in your kind of discovery in, your in discipleship, and what does the gospel mean for you and in your context, and how do you teach it, but how do you get the right answers and find out ways to make those right answers the right answers in another context as well. Um and and, and again, like, I think, scripture, like, this very simple thing, it's like, there could have been a huge, exhortation here about, like, what was the gospel that they were proclaiming, and I think for both of them was this very kind of simple thing, the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And yet what they focus on for both of them is, like, how do you remember the poor,
Mhm.
and how do you take care of those? Because for both of them, and I think that some of, too, this whole idea about, who are you eating with and who are you not, continue to be a position of elevation and status and culture, and
Mhm.
and what we're
And
seeing here is that
separation,
kind of,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, separation
Yeah.
for those who couldn't,
Yeah.
and that kind of thing about, like, what is the orientation, and as you say, we often start with this, this sense, and if we're humble enough, we recognize that, like, different people have a different sense of that vocational calling, and also a unique way to them with God, that they can proclaim that in context that I can't. um but then at the heart of that continues to be something very practical, and it's like,
Mhm.
if who we're talking to, if and I remember that you saying this early on in our conversations last year, it was just like, if it's not good news, like, if it's not actually, objectively good news for the person, then it's not the gospel. Like,
Mhm.
it's not the message of the freedom, the redemption, the saving, loving grace of God. It's that thing where, like it says, we people come in secretly to spy on our freedom so that they might enslave us. And I feel like that, for me, kind of, that kind of language really encapsulates that other picture that you were talking about at the beginning, about where we're judging, the witness and ministry of other contexts, and
Mhm.
how people are doing it in there, and looking for ways to kind of further bolster and validate our own kind of places and positions, which often then don't actually lead to freedom, whether that's, what people do towards us and we feel imprisoned by, or what we're doing for other people. And again, those things continue also to be a distraction from the simple thing, which is that we go out and we remember the poor. And in that, we find that kind of calling to preach and teach the gospel. It's like, what good is telling people, that God's going to care for them in this hope of eternal glory, if they're too hungry to pay attention, like, and we've all had those moments. You were talking about being tired today, but it's like we have those moments where, we just know that if the circumstances were different, we would be much more present in the moment that we're there and with the
Mhm.
person who's sharing something with us.
Mhm.
And I think that kind of contrast in this, I find so compelling. I heard this earlier on this week a couple times on, for the daily Eucharist service, and I was just really struck with that kind of the contrast of that big picture. What's the gospel that we're proclaiming, and the super practical, are we remembering the poor? And as you say, the interesting thing about the way that he names, refers to Peter as Cephas when he's like challenging him, and Peter when he's
Yeah.
recognizing him as, like, and you just kind of wonder if, like, that was like a going thing where, he'd be like, oh, here comes in Cephas, and he's like, oh,
Mhm.
here comes that crazy lunatic Saul, like,
Yeah.
and it's
Like
like,
in Eston, a couple of the townies they would have, like, they had their nicknames, but then they also had alter egos when they were drunk. So it was like, yeah, Harriet was out again, or Harry, or whatever
Yeah.
name that was them, kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
The other thing that um, kind of jumps out to me is the idea of, you know, salvation or the
Mm,
gospel,
mm,
um, being very individualistic, and
mm,
how we, you know, how does it apply to me? How do I look? What do I do?
mm,
And here, when we're talking about the poor, it's like, okay, well, no, actually, it's how do you interact with others? How are you
mm,
involved in those, in the lives around you, walking with them in that?
mm,
How are you with those that are needy, instead
mm,
of trying to, you know, cover your own needs, God-shaped hole? Uh, how are you filling the hole that other people
mm.
have? That sounds weird. Um, you know, their need.
Yeah. 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 Mm. But even even like that language, I reminded me of something I heard that earlier on this week at a service. I was at a friend's church meeting up with her for coffee, but was at her service, midweek service before then, and she was just kind of giving a little bit of kind of a homily and reflection, and she just said, like, we don't she was talking about the widow and her two little pennies, or two
Yeah.
mites, that she gave at the temple, and she was just saying, like, the example of the woman is for us to remember too, that like giving to God is not about having enough so we give from our excess, but we give from a place where it actually costs us something,
Mhm.
because God matters, because the faith matters, because the ministry, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And I just, as you were saying that too, I realized, like, so many times in my life where that kind of individualistic side is also about, like, I've got to get my heart in the right place. I've got to be, the best I can be, so that then I can go out and share that good news. And God
Yeah.
seems to have much more kind of grace and room to say that, like, he's not asking for the perfect, perfect humans with abundance to give.
Mhm.
He's asking for us to, for us to come as we are in this time and in this space, and to do it not necessarily like, yeah, but to do it in a way that is about being with others,
Yeah.
that actually kind of, less about like filling a void within ourselves so that then we can talk, but recognizing that the broken places are places, like, that can be connected with other people's broken places. More
Mhm.
like, yeah, more like putting a bunch of Lego groups together, instead of like these perfectly formed, creatures or whatever it might be. But
Yeah. Not like Power
um
Rangers where they all come together to form
yeah.
the Mega Sword, or whatever it was called.
Yeah, what was it,
But
Meg?
Megatron? No,
No,
that's
that's Transformers.
yeah, Meg, Megazord,
What
Sword.
was,
I don't know. It's been a long time.
what was the other one? Captain Planet. He's our
That's so funny.
hero.
You ever see that College Humor, like the Funny or Die, where they did Captain Planet, and it had Don Cheadle as the Captain Planet, and he just started killing people because they were like polluting stuff, or like turning them into dogs, or like trees and like everything. And the other kids that have the rings are just like, "What are you doing, no?" And they're all freaked out. He's just losing his mind, zapping everyone. It was funny.
Oh
That was
goodness
like,
gracious.
I think that came out when we were in college. Like, that's how old
Oh
that is.
man.
But
Yeah.
yeah, anyway. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Hmm.
it reminds me of um Wooden Heart by what's the band name? He does that like kind of spoken word.
Oh, Listener? Is it?
Listener, yeah. And that
Yeah.
Broken Heart, that Wooden Heart song, which is just fantastic. But he's like, we're all just
Hmm.
torn rags sewn together,
Yeah.
um,
Hmm.
and about
Yeah.
building each other together, and uh,
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
living living on the sea in these boats. And yeah, it's just a
Hmm.
wonderful song. Check it out. although it's probably not the music for everyone. It is quite fascinating.
Mm.
Yeah,
Well,
that's
you
that's
won't know until you listen to it.
it's
So
true. It's true.
let's boost his listens by 3, and
Yeah, there we
let's
go.
all go out.
But that's that's the thing is like we're reading this about Galatians, and Peter is purposely choosing the path of least resistance
Mm, mm,
with siding with the circumcised. That this is familiar. This is this. No one's going to call him out other than Paul.
mm,
When no one's going to call him out, no one's going to say you're doing it wrong or whatever.
mm,
And that's the safest route for him to take, and it's the wrong one.
mm,
the
mm,
The right one is the messy route that
mm,
is not going to look as clean and pristine. It's not
mm,
going to be straightforward. It's not
mm,
going to come up against different obstacles and um, different blockages in that route that you need to overcome or work your way through
mm.
or blow up. Um, but it's the right one, and
Yeah.
I know for me, oftentimes I will pick the clean, pristine route
Mm,
because I don't want to have to deal with people and having to justify
mm,
myself to people on why I'm
mm.
um, doing what I'm doing in sharing
Yeah.
the gospel with people, but just living life. Like, not even
Mm,
I'm going to evangelize them and I'm going to,
mm.
like that water cooler skit that we watched from that one company where it's at the office and he's trying to figure out how to invite him to church and he's like, I'm going to baptize him and he just pulls the water cooler out and starts shaking on him. But just living life
Yeah.
and being with them, or as
Yeah.
simple as eating with
Mm,
them, like what Peter
mm,
chose. And
mm.
that's,
But I think what you're saying though too is actually really interesting because it's like what he gets pointed out is like the hypocrisy of it, right? Where like when he's in front of Peter or when he's in front of Paul and with the other people, it's like this, yeah, of course we wouldn't, ask everybody to become Jewish, and and yeah, we don't need to just have kosher food, and this, that, and the other. And then as soon as the back's turned, as you say, it becomes the path of least resistance in certain contexts. And then it also becomes a thing that he says, like, of course people aren't going to take you seriously when you ask them to do something because they see in your own life that you're not doing it.
mm-hmm,
And I think, as you were saying, that kind of that kind of path of least resistance leads us to that point where we're actually, what ends up happening is we're not living in a way that's like that's true to ourselves, that's not valuable for other people.
mm-hmm,
And it's like, of course, the gospel, the message of Jesus seems very kind of, wishy-washy and like has no teeth to it, or
yeah,
has nothing to like grab hold of, because we're constantly like softening it down. It's like, oh, like, yeah, this was Jesus, but it's okay, you don't have to believe all that stuff, or you don't have to do all those things. And
yeah,
yes, I do think some of that is true, as we see in this passage. Again, there was changes in what the Spirit was asking them to witness to, in that sense
uh,
of like, what
from
was
the Old
true and what
Testament
was
being
important. but
circumcised to the New
but when
Testament is the
yeah,
circumcision of the heart, like things change.
yeah,
But
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, and how we find ourselves in that with the people, because I think we often, like, at least I know for myself, it's very easy being with people who kind of don't go to my church, and I can talk about the church as like this part of my life, but I also don't have to be that person with them, if that makes
mm-hmm,
sense, because I'm like,
yeah,
oh, I'm not going to be that pushy evangelist guy. And I don't want them to feel like the only reason they're here is because I think they could be potentials to come to our church.
mm-hmm,
And yet it's like, so what am I doing, what am I offering, what is that message, what is that gospel? And
mm-hmm,
does it have any kind of connection or traction in my life, as you say, or is that just the, it's just easiest in the moment just to kind of let it be, right?
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
Well,
That's all I've got.
that's I was gonna say that's the timer. And for being, for offering in a for well for first naming and claiming the episode and almost
Mm-hmm,
like tanking the technology, and
mm-hmm,
then offering an apology to people beforehand that your brain wasn't working. You've You brought it, Derek. You have brought it from
You know,
start to
I'm
finish.
just at that spot where I'm so tired that I don't have the filter, so I'm just going with it, and
Yeah.
we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Scuba
Anyway,
dive for the scuba life.
coffee. Yeah,
Yeah.
Scuba Steve. All right,
Well, it's good
blessings,
to,
everyone.
yeah. And to
Toodles.
enjoy, you read some more Galatians and find out what's
Yeah, how
going
does
on.
it end?
All
All
right,
right.
everyone. Peace.
Okay. Bye.